So the first thing you need to do is to decide which fabrics will be your A fabrics and which will be your B fabrics. So in this version, I'm using this charcoal as my A and pink as my B. So you need to alternate your strips, A, B, A, B, A, B, and then sew your strip sets together like this. You will need 2 of each arrangement. Here I have the first 2 strips sewn, and before I sew this last one to these 2, I press my seams towards my A fabric. So in all of the strip sets, we press towards the A. So when we start sewing our checkerboard together, all the seams will nest. So you won't have to use pins at that point and everything will line up just great. So go ahead and press your seams towards your A and then sew the last strips to this strip set and then press that towards your A fabric as well. So here I have my strip sets, my ABA and BAB. They are sewn and seams pressed towards the A fabric. So now we need to cut 2-inch strips from each and look at the pattern to see how many you will need. You should be able to get 20 from each strip set. So I am going to use this XL Stripology ruler that I have, and it makes cutting much faster. You don't have to use it if you don't want, but it really speeds things up. So I'm just gonna line these up best I can here. I'm lining up the bottom of the ruler with the bottom of this strip. You can just cut one if you want, cut both of them, whatever you feel comfortable with. So I make sure that my 0, if you're using Stripology ruler, is on the right side of my selvage because I'm going to cut the selvage off, and then I cut 2, 4, 6, 8, and I will end at 18 because my ruler is broken right there. So I can cut 9 very quickly. Okay, so there we have 9 from each. So I will go ahead and show you how to arrange these to start sewing our blocks together. So we will arrange them. So we need, oops, let's take this away. We need this arrangement. And we need this arrangement. So you can see our seams are pressed opposite direction, so you won't even have to pin. The seams will just nest together nicely. So refer to the pattern how many you need, but I will start sewing these 2 together, press my seams according to the pattern, and then I'll sew these together. So here we have our A blocks and our B blocks sewn together and all the seams pressed in the opposite direction as shown in the pattern. So now we need to arrange the bigger blocks for the background. So for the corner blocks, we need 2 of each. So we go B, A, B. So we need 4 of this arrangement. You will sew these together and press the seams according to the pattern. And then you also need 1 larger square that we will cut into triangles for the other four sides of the star. So that one is B, A, B, and then the next row is alternating, A, B, A, and then the opposite for the bottom again. B, A, B. So this is the one large square that after you sew these together and press the seams according to the pattern, we will cut in half along each diagonal. And then, so you need one of these and four of these. These ones you will not cut. So after you sew these and press these, they'll be ready to sew to your star. Here we have our 4 corner blocks sewn and the seams pressed, and our 1 larger block sewn and seams pressed. So now we are going to take this one and cut it in half along each diagonal, and then we will be ready to sew these pieces to our star. So what I do is line up my 45-degree line of my ruler with the bottom of the block and make sure that we are cutting from corner to corner. So once that's lined up, go ahead and make your cut. Then pick up your ruler carefully and move it to this other side. Let's see, I'm gonna have to go like this. Well, my camera's in the way. So instead of lining up my 45-degree line, I'm just going to line up my ruler from corner to corner and make sure that this is straight here. And then make sure you're applying good pressure as you're cutting so the pieces don't move. And make one cut like that. So now you have your 4 triangles for your star. So the next thing we'll do is mark our seams to sew them to our star block. So when you're sewing a star together using Y seams, you need a couple things. So some sort of marking tool. I use this Sew Line pencil. This is the pink lead, and you need pins and a ruler. So first thing we do is we will sew 2 diamonds together. So take 2 diamonds. They need to be placed right sides together. And before you arrange them perfectly, what we need to do is on the wrong side of the top diamond, make 2 marks 1/4 inch away from the edges of this corner. So we are sewing our diamonds together. This is the center of our star, and we're sewing together this direction. So we need to make a mark here and a mark along this side. And you can see here, there's 2 marks. The point where these 2 marks intersect is where we will stop sewing our seam with our needle down and back stitch a couple stitches to keep that in place. So now you can put the diamonds right sides together. Put a pin through this intersection right here. So then when you get close to sewing it, you will pull it out and see the tiny hole where the pin was. And that's where you will stop your needle and then back stitch. And then you can pin one more at the point here. So that's the first step, is to start sewing on this side here, a 1/4 inch seam, stop here, and backstitch. This is what your seam will look like after it's sewn, before it's pressed. So you can see I stopped my stitch at that point and then backstitched. So now I'm going to press each of my seams open, and then we will sew these pairs together. Here we have 2 pairs pressed open. The seams are pressed open. So now we will sew these together just like we did the pairs. So they will go right sides together. We will make 2 marks along this corner. So that's a 1/4 inch in from the edge, and this is where we will place our pin. So first pin here, and then you will pin at the center. And when you're pinning on this side, I like to make sure the seams are lined up here, so the point will sew together good. So again, we will start sewing on this side, and then sew our 1/4 inch seam, stop sewing at the point, and backstitch a couple stitches. Here's that seam sewn, and you can see here where my seam ended and backstitch. So now I'm going to press these seams open as well. So here I have both halves of my star, and I will show you a trick for making sure that these points line up perfectly after they're sewn together. The first thing you need to do is make sure this seam, or the edge here, is a 1/4 inch away from where these points come together. So that's a 1/4 inch there. And that's that's a 1/4 inch on that side too. Okay, so now we need to put them right sides together and make our marks along both sides here, because we need to start our seam a 1/4 inch in from the edge and end it a 1/4 inch from the edge. Okay, so I have that one marked. Now I need to mark this side. Okay, so to make sure that these points line up perfectly, what I do is I put a pin directly through this point here where those seams come together, and it should come out on the other side where those seams all come together. There you go. So you can see that pin goes through there. Then I put it in the same place on the bottom piece, and I leave it vertical like this. So then after I push these 2 halves together, leaving my pin vertical, I put a pin on each side like I normally would, flat. And this just keeps the pieces from moving around, because if I insert a pin there and then go like this, sometimes my seam will move. And this way, I take the pin out and that stays in place. So when we sew our 1/4 inch seam, it will go right where we need it to be for the points to line up perfectly. Now, after we do that, we will put our pin through the marks here. So make sure your sides line up. Put your pin through the intersection there. Maybe one more if you want. And then on this side. So we will start our seam right here at this point where those lines intersect. stitch a couple stitches and back stitch, sew all the way down and end at this point where these two lines intersect and back stitch a couple stitches. Then press those seams open. All right, so here I have my halves sewn together and pressed my seams open. And you can see that my points come together just like I wanted in the center. So now we can start sewing our background pieces to the star. So now that we have our star sewn together and our background ready to go, I'm just going to show you how I am arranging this, and then we will start sewing these triangle pieces first to our star block. So this is where those triangles will go, and then the squares will go in these other four corners. So we'll sew the squares in after these triangles. So this is just like sewing any other background using a Y seam. So on the wrong side of the background triangle, we need to make a mark 1/4 inch in from each corner. So I'm just using my 1/4 inch line on my ruler, lining it up with my edge here and making 2 marks along the sides. So these marks here, that intersection where the 2 marks come together, is where we will pin. So I like to pin on this side first. I'm going to move these pieces aside for now. Okay, so get your pins. You'll insert a pin through the point where those 2 marks intersect. And then you place the pin. So I moved this piece aside because we were not sewing through this side yet. We place the pin through where the last stitch was on the seam that sewed these 2 diamonds together. So you can see a little better there. And then it should come out on the back through the mark that you made on that diamond. So once you have that, the pin through both those points, line up the edges. We'll first push them together and then line up the edges. So that's pinned. Now I need to line the 2 edges up so they are aligned here. And you can pin as many pins as you want. When you have these seams, it's kind of nice to pin on the seams so they stay flat when you're sewing. Okay, so when you're sewing, you'll start sewing here. Sew your 1/4 inch seam until you get to this point. As you're sewing, kind of pull this aside so you don't get that in your seam. Stop when you get to this point and then back stitch. Then I will show you how to flip this side around to this side and sew the second side together. We won't press the seam until both of these sides are sewn. All right, here you can see that seam. I stopped sewing at that point and then back stitched. Now we are going to place these 2 sides, right sides together. And you kind of just have to maneuver it around a little bit. Okay, so you'll first put your pin through where your seam ended here on the diamonds. Then you put your pin through where your seam ended on the diamond in that background, your last seam that you sewed. So you can see my pin goes through there and then back through the point where those 2 lines intersect. Now you just need to straighten those edges. And then pin down that side. All right, so again, we will start sewing on this side. So all the way till you get to this pin here, stop with your needle down and then back stitch 2 to 3 stitches right there. All right, so here you have one of the sides sewn. I haven't pressed the seams yet, so I will do that. I'm going to press my seams open, and then we are going to trim off these dog ears here, and then continue sewing the other 3 background triangles. All right, here we have that first Y seam pressed, and it's looking good. So now just trim off the extra you have here, and then continue sewing those other 3, and then we will sew our background squares after we have sewn these all to the star. So I'll come back to show you how to sew these squares. Here we have our star with all the corners, the triangles sewn to these sides. Now we need to put our corner squares in. So this is the same process as the triangles. So take your marking tool and your ruler, and I'm going to mark on the wrong side of this square here. So flip it over, line up the 1/4 inch line of your ruler with the edge, and mark on both sides. So it goes like that, so I'll flip it over like this. And again, insert your pin through the point where those 2 lines intersect, and then through the point where the seam ended when the diamonds were sewn together. And then just line up those 2 edges. So it's the exact same process. You will stop sewing at the marked intersection and backstitch, and then we will flip that side over and sew to the other side. Then after we do that, we will press our seams open. All right, so just like before, we will flip this side over so these 2 sides are right sides together. And insert your pin where the seam ended on these diamonds, and then through where the seam ended in that where we just sewed, and it should come out on the marked line on the background piece. Then just line those sides up. Try not to stretch anything, just smooth it out. When we start stretching, that's when things get skewed and wavy and just don't lay flat like they should. So try to avoid stretching. So start your seam here and end it here, and then we will press that seam open. So this is what it looks like before pressing. So I'm going to go ahead and press that seam open, and then I'll show you what it looks like after that. Here we go with our pressed seam. So now we just need to sew the last 3 squares, and we are done with our checkerboard star block for the Why Not star. So here is our finished star block with the checkerboard background, and you can see everything lines up so nicely and the Y seams turned out perfectly. So I hope you enjoyed this video.